In September of 2022, two bow hunters tracking an elk through a remote, unnamed basin in the San Juan Mountains of Colorado stumbled upon a scene that had been frozen in time for nearly a decade. They found the skeletal remains of a woman sitting upright on a rotted log, positioned as if she were watching the dying embers of a fire pit that had long since turned to cold ash and mud. The bones, bleached white by years of sun and snow, were still partially clad in the tattered remnants of hiking gear. 8 years earlier, in August of 2014, a 26-year-old cartographer and avid mountaineer named Amelia Thorne had driven into these same mountains for a week-long solo expedition and vanished without a trace, leaving behind a mystery that would become one of the region's most enduring and unsettling legends. The discovery of her remains, not in a ravine or under a rock slide, but in a state of eerie, silent repose, did not close her case. Instead, it opened a new, far more perplexing chapter, posing a question that defied all easy answers. What had happened to her in those final, lonely moments that led her to simply sit down and wait for the end in the vast, indifferent wilderness? If stories like this keep you searching for answers long after they end, take a moment to subscribe to Kilo Stories and like this video. It helps us continue uncovering the forgotten, the unexplained, and the haunting truths left behind in the wild. The morning of August 11th, 2014, dawned clear and cool in the small town of Silverton, Colorado, a place that felt more like an outpost than a town, dwarfed on all sides by the jagged, mineral-streaked peaks of the San Juans. Amelia Thorne had spent the night in a small motel on the edge of town, and by 6:30 a.m., she was already loading her pack into the back of her dark blue Toyota 4Runner. She was meticulous in her preparations, a habit ingrained from years of exploring some of the most challenging terrain in the American West. Her pack was a carefully curated collection of lightweight gear, high-energy food, and sophisticated mapping equipment. She was a cartographer by trade, but it was more than a profession, it was a passion. She believed that maps were not just tools for navigation, but stories of the earth, and she took pride in ground-truthing old routes and charting forgotten trails. This trip was meant to be a personal project, an attempt to map a series of old mining paths that were rumored to connect a string of high-altitude lakes, a route known to only a handful of old-timers and not depicted on any modern topographical survey. Her last confirmed human contact was with the clerk at a gas station on the edge of town. He later recalled her as being bright-eyed and full of a quiet, focused energy. She bought a coffee, a local newspaper she would never read, and 2 extra bottles of water. She spoke briefly about her plans, mentioning her intent to explore the high country north of the Animas River. She seemed to know exactly what she was doing, the clerk would later tell investigators. More prepared than 90% of the tourists who come through here thinking they can just walk up a mountain. The final electronic trace of her existence was a text message sent to her older brother at 7015 AA, MR. It was a simple, confident message that belied the immense wilderness she was about to enter. At the trailhead, weather is perfect. Everything is a go. See you in a week. Love you. A photo was attached, a selfie taken from the driver's seat of her vehicle. Behind her, through the dusty window, a dirt road snaked into a dense forest of aspen and pine. And beyond that, the raw, gray granite of the mountains rose up to meet a cloudless sky. Her smile was genuine, untroubled. It was the last image of her alive. The trailhead was not an officially marked one, just a nondescript pull-off on a little-used Forest Service road. Her 4Runner, parked neatly and locked, would be the only sign that she had ever been there. For 7 days, as she had planned, no one worried. Amelia was known for her self-reliance and her adherence to her itineraries. A week of silence was part of the plan. But when the 8th day came and went with no call, no text, no sign of her return, a small knot of anxiety in her brother's stomach began to tighten into a cold, hard certainty that something had gone terribly wrong. The official search for Amelia Thorne began on the morning of August 19th, a full 8 days after she had last been seen. Her brother, after a sleepless night of calling her phone and hearing only the automated message of a device that was either off or out of range, contacted the San Juan County Sheriff's Office. The initial response was measured, professional, but tinged with the grim pragmatism of those accustomed to the mountain's unforgiving nature. The first step was to locate her vehicle. and a deputy found the blue 4Runner within hours, exactly where her brother had predicted it would be, parked at the pull-off on Forest Service Road 585. The truck was locked, and a thick layer of dust and pine needles had settled on the windshield, indicating it had been stationary for some time. Inside, through the windows, everything appeared to be in order. A sleeping bag and some casual clothes were on the back seat. Her wallet, containing her ID and credit cards, was in the glove compartment, along with her cell phone. The phone's battery was dead. This discovery immediately set a somber tone for the search. It ruled out the possibility that she had simply changed her plans and driven elsewhere. She had left her vehicle intentionally, with her essential communication and financial tools inside, fully expecting to return. The search and rescue operation ramped up quickly, becoming a multi-agency effort involving county sheriffs, Forest Service rangers, and dozens of volunteers from local mountaineering clubs. A command post was established at the trailhead, a small tent city of maps, radios, and weary faces. The initial search focused on the logical first steps of her planned route. Teams of ground pounders, experienced hikers trained in search techniques, fanned out across the terrain, their eyes scanning for any sign of passage. A broken branch, a scuff mark on a rock, a discarded food wrapper. Helicopter crews flew grid patterns over the vast, wrinkled landscape, their observers looking for any unnatural splash of color against the muted greens and grays of the wilderness. The search dogs were brought in on the second day. They were given a scent article, one of Amelia's t-shirts from the back of her truck, and they immediately picked up a trail leading away from the vehicle and onto the faint path she had intended to follow. The handlers were hopeful. The dogs moved with purpose for the first 2 miles, tracking her path as it wound its way up a steep, forested ridge. But then, in a small, rocky clearing, the trail went cold. The dogs became confused, circling the area, sniffing the air, but the scent was simply gone. It was as if she had been lifted into the sky. The handlers reported the anomaly back to the command post, and the search coordinators were perplexed. A scent trail doesn't just stop. It might fade over time or be washed away by rain, but the weather had been dry. The abrupt disappearance of the trail suggested a sudden change in her mode of transport. Perhaps she was met by someone on horseback, or even more improbably, in a vehicle on a trail that was not meant for them. But an exhaustive search of the surrounding area revealed no hoof prints, no tire tracks. The mystery of the lost scent became a central and frustrating theme of the entire operation. Days turned into a week. The search area expanded, becoming an impossibly large circle on the topographical maps. The terrain was brutal deep canyons, treacherous scree fields, and dense, tangled forests where visibility was limited to a few feet. Every day, the teams would return to the command post at dusk, exhausted and demoralized, with nothing to report. The hope of finding her alive began to fade, replaced by the grim determination to at least find her, to bring her home. After 2 weeks of intensive searching, with resources stretched thin and no new leads, the official operation was scaled back. The volunteers went home, the helicopters were recalled, and the command post was dismantled. The San Juan County Sheriff's Office officially reclassified Amelia's case from a search and rescue mission to an open missing persons investigation. For her family, this bureaucratic shift was a devastating blow. It was a formal admission that the authorities were giving up, that the vastness of the mountains had won. Her brother stayed for another month, organizing his own small searches with friends and hired guides, plastering missing posters in every town and lodge within a 100-mile radius. But the wilderness held its silence. The posters faded and tore in the wind and rain. Amelia Thorne's name became a ghost story, a cautionary tale told to tourists about the dangers of the high country. Her file, thick with maps, reports, and fruitless leads, was placed in a filing cabinet, a paper monument to a life that had simply vanished into the thin mountain air. The years that followed Amelia Thorne's disappearance were marked by a profound and aching silence. For her family, the absence of answers was a unique form of torment, a wound that could not heal because the story had no end. Every changing season brought a renewed, painful hope. The spring snowmelt might reveal what the winter had hidden. A summer hiker might wander off a trail. An autumn hunter might see something out of place. But each season passed into the next, and the mountains kept their secret. The case remained open but inactive. The lead detective retired, and the file was passed to a new generation of deputies who knew her only as a black-and-white photo stapled to an old report. The story, however, did not entirely fade away. In the small communities surrounding the San Juan Mountains, it evolved into a piece of local folklore. Her disappearance was so clean, so devoid of evidence, that it invited speculation that ranged from the plausible to the fantastic. Some believed she had fallen into an abandoned, unmapped mine shaft, a common feature in the heavily mined region. Others whispered that she had met with foul play, that she had stumbled upon something she wasn't meant to see, a drug operation, a poacher's camp, and had been silenced. A more persistent rumor centered on a figure known locally as the Ridge Runner, a reclusive hermit who was said to live off the grid deep in the wilderness, shunning all human contact. He was a specter, rarely seen but often blamed for any unexplained occurrence in the mountains. The sheriff's office had looked into him during the initial investigation. They had found his makeshift camp and spoken with him. He was an elderly man, weathered and wary, but they had found no connection to Amelia's disappearance. Still, his name would surface in campfire stories and late-night conversations at the local bars, a convenient villain for a story that had none. Amelia's brother David became the reluctant keeper of her memory. He created a website dedicated to her, a digital archive of photos, stories, and maps of the search area. He returned to Colorado every summer, a grim pilgrimage to the place that had taken his sister. He would hike the trails, talk to locals, and follow up on any new theory or rumor, no matter how outlandish. He hired private investigators, psychics, and specialized search teams with ground-penetrating radar. Each effort ended in the same frustrating silence, a costly and emotionally draining dead end. The private investigators re-interviewed everyone, pored over the case files, and came to the same conclusions as the police. They noted the strangeness of the lost scent trail, the tidiness of her walked car, and the complete lack of any indication that she was in distress or planning to disappear voluntarily. One investigator's final report concluded with a sentence that haunted her family. "It is not that the evidence is contradictory, it is that the evidence is absent." Amelia Thorne did not leave a trail of clues, she left a void. As the 5th anniversary of her disappearance approached, a popular true crime podcast dedicated an episode to her case. It brought a brief surge of national attention, a flood of new tips and theories to the sheriff's office. The detectives dutifully followed up on each one, but they all led back to the same familiar emptiness. The podcast episode ended with the host interviewing a retired search and rescue veteran who had worked on the original search. His words captured the essence of the mystery. "We search for people in a three-dimensional space," he said. "We look for what's on the ground, what's in the water, what's down a cliff. But with her, it was like we needed to search a fourth dimension, the one where people just ceased to be." And so, the void remained. The website David ran became less of an active investigation tool and more of a memorial. The posters in the small mountain towns were replaced with newer ones for other lost hikers, other transient souls claimed by the wilderness. The name Amelia Thorne was slowly being forgotten by the outside world, a ghost story whose sharp edges were being worn smooth by the relentless passage of time, waiting for a discovery that no one, not even her relentlessly hopeful family, could have ever imagined. The discovery that finally broke the 8-year silence came on a crisp Saturday in mid-September of 2022. Two men, brothers from New Mexico, were deep in the backcountry of the San Juan National Forest, bow hunting for elk. They were experienced outdoorsmen who prided themselves on getting away from the established trails, into the truly wild parts of the forest where the big game lived. They had been tracking a large bull elk for most of the morning, a pursuit that had led them into a small, secluded basin several miles from any marked path. The basin was a shallow bowl of land, sheltered by a high ridge and choked with a mix of old-growth spruce and dense willow thickets. It was not a place one would stumble into by accident. As they moved slowly through the undergrowth, one of the brothers, the younger one, stopped. He had caught a scent on the wind, not of elk, but of something else, something vaguely foul and unnatural. A few moments later, he spotted it, a tattered piece of blue nylon fabric snagged on the branch of a deadfall tree. It was a piece of a backpack, faded by the sun and frayed by the elements. Their curiosity piqued. They moved closer. The backpack itself was a few yards away, leaning against the base of a large spruce tree, mostly collapsed and chewed on by animals. Inside, they found a corroded metal water bottle, a compass whose needle had frozen in place, and a small, leather-bound journal. The journal was the most remarkable find. Though its cover was warped and its pages were stiff and stained with mildew, much of the writing inside was, miraculously, still legible. They set it aside and continued to scan the area. The scene they pieced together was that of an old, long-abandoned campsite. There was a faint circle of stones that had once formed a fire ring, now almost completely reclaimed by moss and dirt. Near the fire ring was a large, fallen log, and sitting on that log, as if patiently waiting for their arrival, was the skeleton. The hunters would later describe the moment of discovery as profoundly unsettling. It wasn't the presence of human remains that shocked them. They had found animal carcasses before, but the posture. The skeleton was sitting up, its spine leaning against a smaller, upright log placed behind it for support. The legs were stretched out, crossed at the ankles. One arm rested on its lap, the other lay by its side. The skull was tilted slightly forward, its empty sockets gazing in the direction of the cold fire pit. There were no signs of a struggle, no scattered bones, no indication of a violent end. It was a scene of unnatural peace, a silent tableau that had been sitting undisturbed for thousands of days and nights. The tatters of clothing still clinging to the bones. The remnants of hiking pants and a fleece jacket matched the description of what Amelia Thorne had been wearing. The hunters knew the story. Everyone in the region did. They backed away slowly, their hunting trip instantly forgotten, replaced by a sense of awe and solemn responsibility. They marked the location on their GPS and hiked the long miles back towards civilization, carrying with them the answer to a mystery that had haunted the mountains for 8 years. The discovery of Amelia Thorne's remains transformed the case from a missing persons investigation into a full-blown death investigation. But it provided more questions than answers. A team from the San Juan County Sheriff's Office, accompanied by a forensic anthropologist from the state, made the arduous journey to the remote campsite. They cordoned off the area and began a slow, methodical excavation of the scene, treating it with the same care as a modern crime scene. Every detail was photographed, documented, and collected. The skeleton itself was carefully disassembled, each bone labeled and placed in an evidence bag for transport back to the medical examiner's office. The initial examination confirmed what the hunters had suspected. The remains were those of a young adult female, consistent with Amelia's age and stature. A definitive identification was made a week later through dental records. The case of the missing cartographer was officially over, but the mystery of her death had just begun. The forensic anthropologist, a woman who had examined hundreds of skeletal remains in her career, found the case to be one of the most perplexing she had ever encountered. A thorough analysis of the bones revealed no signs of physical trauma. There were no bullet holes, no knife marks, no fractures that would indicate a fall or a struggle. There were some marks from animal scavenging, as expected after 8 years in the wilderness, but these were determined to be post-mortem. The cause of death, from a purely skeletal perspective, was completely indeterminable. The scene itself offered no obvious clues. There was no weapon, no sign of another person's presence. The campsite was Spartan, containing only Amelia's own gear. The positioning of the body remained the most baffling element. People who die of hypothermia are often found in a curled position, seeking to conserve heat. Victims of sudden medical events collapse where they stand or lie down. The act of sitting upright in such deliberate and composed posture suggested a level of awareness and calm that was inconsistent with most forms of natural or accidental death in the wilderness. The investigators turned their attention to the one piece of new evidence that might hold a key: the journal. The leather-bound book was sent to a forensic lab to be carefully dried and preserved. Its pages were a mix of personal reflections, cartographic notes, and detailed observations of the flora and fauna she encountered. The early entries chronicled the first few days of her hike, filled with the joy and wonder of being alone in a place she loved. She wrote of tracking a herd of bighorn sheep, of sketching the patterns of lichen on a rock face, of the profound silence that settled over the mountains at night. The writing was clear, lucid, and showed no signs of distress. But then, about 4 or 5 days into her trip, the tone of the entries began to shift. The date stamps became less precise. Her handwriting, previously neat and controlled, grew erratic. She described a sudden and severe illness that had struck her. The symptoms she detailed were violent and debilitating, intense abdominal pain, vomiting, and a disorienting fever that brought on vivid hallucinations. She wrote about her attempts to treat herself with the contents of her first aid kit, but nothing seemed to work. She was too weak to hike out, and she knew she was far from any trail where she might be found. The final entries were fragmented, a heartbreaking record of a mind and body succumbing to an unseen enemy. She wrote of strange dreams, of conversations with her family. One of the last coherent sentences read, "The mountain is quiet today. I think I'll just sit and watch the fire." This discovery provided a plausible narrative for her death. She had died not from a fall or an animal attack, but from a sudden, fulminating illness. The final question was, what could have caused such a rapid and fatal sickness? The investigators considered several possibilities. She could have contracted a severe case of giardia from contaminated water, but that typically takes longer to become life-threatening. A more likely culprit, suggested by the forensic pathologist, was the consumption of a poisonous plant. The high mountains of Colorado are home to several highly toxic species, such as water hemlock or monkshood, which can easily be mistaken for edible plants by the untrained eye. If she had been foraging for wild greens to supplement her food supply, a simple mistake could have had catastrophic consequences. The symptoms she described in her journal, neurological and gastrointestinal distress, were consistent with certain types of plant poisoning. This theory explained the lack of physical trauma and the presence of a sudden, fatal illness. It also provided a tragic context for the peaceful scene of her death. In her final, fever-ridden hours, weak and knowing the end was near, she may have simply found a comfortable spot by her last fire and let go. The investigation into what had poisoned Amelia Thorne led the team back to the campsite and to the contents of her recovered gear. The forensic botanist on the team conducted a meticulous survey of the plant life in the immediate vicinity of her camp, collecting samples of everything that could be considered a potential food source. They also carefully examined the contents of her cooking pot, which had been found near the fire ring. It contained the desiccated remains of what appeared to be a stew of foraged greens and roots. The samples from the pot and the surrounding area were sent for toxicological analysis. The results came back several weeks later and provided the final, tragic piece of the puzzle. The residue in the cooking pot contained high concentrations of orellanine, a potent mycotoxin found in certain species of cortinarius mushrooms, often referred to as fool's webcap. These mushrooms are notoriously deceptive. They look similar to several edible varieties and, most insidiously, have a delayed onset of symptoms. A person can eat them and feel perfectly fine for several days, or even up to 2 weeks before the toxin begins to attack the kidneys, leading to irreversible renal failure. The symptoms of orellanine poisoning, nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain, and eventual kidney failure leading to death were a near-perfect match for the descriptions Amelia had written in her journal. The forensic botanist confirmed that several species of cortinarius mushrooms grew in the damp, shaded areas near the stream where Amelia had made her camp. The theory was now a near certainty. Amelia, an experienced but perhaps not expert forager, had made a fatal mistake. She had likely gathered what she believed were edible mushrooms and added them to her meal. Days later, deep in the wilderness and miles from help, the poison began its silent, deadly work. This explanation provided a logical framework for the entire mystery. It explained why she was so far off her intended route. She may have been wandering in a delirious state, or she may have intentionally sought out this secluded basin as a good place to camp and forage. It explained the sudden onset of her illness and the lack of any external signs of foul play. And it explained the manner of her death. Knowing she was too sick to move, she likely spent her last days at the campsite she had made. The act of sitting by the fire was not one of despair, but perhaps one of acceptance. A final, quiet moment of communion with the wilderness she loved, even as it was claiming her life. The reclusive hermit, the Ridge Runner, from the local legends, was once again located and interviewed. Now much older, he remembered the search 8 years prior. He told the detectives that he had never seen Amelia, but he was familiar with the mushrooms they described. He called them death caps, and said that even he, with his decades of experience living off the land, avoided all but the most easily identifiable fungi. He added a final, poignant observation. "The mountains don't have a grudge," he said. his voice raspy from disuse. They just are. You have to know your place here. One mistake is all it takes. The interview put to rest the last lingering suspicions of foul play. The story of Amelia Thorne was not a crime story, but a tragedy. The final piece of the official investigation was a review of Amelia's recovered journal by a handwriting expert and a psychologist. They confirmed that the progression of the writing from neat and orderly to chaotic and fragmented was consistent with someone suffering from a progressive, toxic metabolic encephalopathy, a brain dysfunction caused by poisoning. The psychologist noted that the final entries, though disjointed, did not express fear or panic, but rather a dreamlike, almost serene sense of resignation. Her final written words, "I think I'll just sit and watch the fire," were likely a literal description of her last conscious act. With the toxicological evidence, the journal entries, and the lack of any evidence to the contrary, the San Juan County Sheriff's Office and the medical examiner officially closed the case. The cause of death was listed as accidental poisoning by ingestion of toxic mushrooms, leading to renal failure. The manner of death was classified as misadventure. The official report, when it was finally released to the public, brought a somber end to the years of speculation. The lurid theories of murder and mysterious hermits were replaced by a quieter, more intimate story of a single, tragic mistake. The news was particularly difficult for the community of outdoor enthusiasts and survival experts, for whom Amelia had become a symbol of competent self-reliance. Her story was a chilling reminder that the wilderness operates on a razor's edge, where knowledge and experience are crucial, but never foolproof. One detail from the journal, which was not widely reported but was shared with her family, provided a final, heartbreaking glimpse into her state of mind. Tucked into a pocket in the back of the leather-bound book was a single, pressed wildflower, a vibrant blue columbine, the state flower of Colorado. Beneath it, in her neatest handwriting, likely from the beginning of her trip, she had written a quote from the naturalist John Muir, "The mountains are calling, and I must go." It was a phrase that had defined her life, and now, tragically, it served as her epitaph. Her brother, David, upon receiving her remains and her journal, found a measure of peace in the terrible certainty. The agonizing void of the unknown was finally filled, albeit with a story of suffering and loss. He wrote a final entry on the website he had maintained for 8 years, thanking everyone who had searched and hoped. He wrote, "Amy died in a place she loved, doing what she loved. Her death was not the result of malice, but of a single human error in a world that does not forgive them. She was not a victim in the way many people thought. She was a courageous explorer who pushed her limits and, in the end, was reclaimed by the wild beauty she sought to understand and map." He had her remains cremated, and the following summer, he hiked deep into the San Juan Mountains to a high, windy pass that she had always described as her favorite place on earth. And there, he scattered her ashes, returning her at last to the wilderness that had been both her passion and her final silent witness. The case of Amelia Thorne left a lasting mark on the community and the broader world of outdoor recreation. It became a frequently cited case study in wilderness survival courses, a stark illustration of the dangers of foraging without absolute certainty. The story was a powerful counter-narrative to the romanticized idea of living off the land, highlighting the unforgiving reality that nature's pantry is filled with both sustenance and poison, often side by side and indistinguishable to the unwary. The local Forest Service took the opportunity to update the safety information on their trailheads, adding specific warnings about the toxic flora and fungi of the region, with pictures of the most dangerous varieties, including the innocent-looking Cortinarius mushrooms that had claimed Amelia's life. It was a small but meaningful change, a legacy written on informational kiosks that might prevent a future tragedy. The discovery also had a profound impact on the search and rescue community. The fact that Amelia was found so far from her planned route in an area that was not considered a high-probability search zone led to discussions about search strategies for solo hikers. It underscored the reality that when a person is alone and becomes sick or injured, their actions can become unpredictable. They might not follow a logical path downhill or toward a trail. They might instead seek out a place of shelter and seclusion, as Amelia seemingly did, making the search for them exponentially more difficult. It reinforced the importance of carrying a personal locator beacon or satellite messenger, a piece of technology that was less common in 2014 but has since become standard equipment for many backcountry adventurers. If Amelia had been carrying such a device, she could have pressed a button and alerted rescuers to her exact location, and her story would have had a very different ending. In the years following the closure of her case, the site where her remains were found became an unofficial, unmarked memorial. A few hikers who managed to piece together the location from news reports and topographical maps made the difficult off-trail journey to the secluded basin. They left small tokens of remembrance on the log where she had sat, a painted stone, a laminated photo, a small bundle of wildflowers. It was a quiet, unsensational tribute, a recognition of her spirit of exploration. The site was not marked on any map, a fitting irony for a woman who had dedicated her life to making them. It remained a place you had to find on your own, a destination for those who understood the pull of the unknown that had led her there in the first place. Her story, stripped of the mystery and speculation, became something more fundamental, a parable about the relationship between humanity and the natural world. It was a story about the beauty and the danger that coexist in wild places, about the allure of solitude and the fragility of life. Amelia Thorne was not a mythical figure who was swallowed by the void. She was a capable, intelligent woman who made a single, understandable mistake. Her legacy was not one of fear, but of respect. A profound respect for the power of the wilderness and the importance of knowledge, humility, and caution in the face of its beautiful, unforgiving indifference. Her final silent vigil by a long-dead fire became a powerful symbol, a quiet testament to a life lived with passion and a death that, in its own tragic way, was as wild and untamed as the mountain she had called home.